hello everybody. Welcome to A Mexican Crossing Lines. Share this out. We're streaming on Facebook at 88.1 FM Fargo Moorhead, YouTube at Duke 1517, and on Twitch at A Mexican Crossing Lines. Let people know what's going on. This is a great show. Thank you for joining us.
That's right. You can follow us on all the social media, but you can also email me at cindy@kppfm.com or duke@kppfm.com. You can also leave us a message about 3 minutes long on our message line at 701-566-0917. Let us know what you think of our content. And welcome to this show about band history. Band History Month. Something strange is happening. This is all occurring across our country on the eve of Black History Month.
That's right.
Ironically, or maybe unironically, rather than expanding our knowledge base about history, about what has happened in America with regard to non-whites, meaning the indigenous people of this continent, meaning the black people that were enslaved, that were brought here against their will. The history pertains just as much to the foundation of this country and to the beginning of the American diaspora, if you will, right? The Western civilization made up of a lot of European immigrants, including your European immigrant families. And we should know more about it instead of trying to bury it, instead of trying to hide it. We should be expanding that. We shouldn't just have Black history learned once a month, or Indigenous people's history learned once a month, or half a month here and half a month there. This is something we should have in our classrooms, in our lives, every day, from a very, very young age. Education about the true history of people in this country.
Exactly. American people, what are you afraid of?
Well, I think that there's a lot of fear, especially by white people, about feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
About the racism in the past, about the genocide, about the violence, about the theft, about the raping.
About the responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes people feel like if they acknowledge what has happened, then somehow they have to pay a price, feel some kind of way about it, feel remorse.
Or they think something's going to get taken away from them. It's unreasonable fear of things, and it keeps people ignorant and in the dark.
Well, it does take something away. If you are still acting, okay, still benefiting, because, you know, one of the things that folks say, white folks especially, when talking about why they shouldn't be made uncomfortable, why they shouldn't have to learn history, why they shouldn't have to hear about slavery or reparations or anything like that, is because they didn't have anything to do with that. You know, that was some people long ago, nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
So why should they have to be uncomfortable and think about reparations?
Well, you know, we're members of society. We have responsibility to society. That's the thing about the American culture. White American culture is that no responsibility for society, no responsibility for the past, and the enrichment of knowing these things and having it as a fabric of your being, it liberates you to be a more whole human being. So, you know, get on with it, you know.
You know, something that's happened recently that has taught me the importance of history and of representation. For every person out there right now that is upset about history being taught that's not white history or whitewashed history, that says, you know, I grew up reading To Kill a Mockingbird. I watched 12 Years a Slave. I learned about, you know, Martin Luther King. I learned about the Freedom Riders. I learned about the desegregation of schools. I learned about Bull Connor. I learned about all of these things. And look at us. Look at us, white people. You, the boomer age, right? You
Yep.
learned about the Vietnam War. You learned about all of these things that happened to black people. You learned about AIM. You learned about the Black Panthers, right?
Right.
And you're still here.
That's right.
And you're not dead. You're not, you didn't get damaged psychologically because you learned about that history. But reality is, for me, Duke, the reality is all of that history that we have learned, that you have learned, that I learned, that I was educated about in high school, middle school, etc., it was whitewashed too.
Oh, yeah.
It was a day late and a dollar short. It was, it was sanitized.
Yes.
I learned about Martin Luther King and his March on Washington and his I Dream speech, but not much more than that.
Nope.
I learned about Rosa Parks. I learned about Harriet Tubman, but not much more detail about what happened to slavery. I wasn't told that the foundation of the economy of this country was built off of slavery, that the foundation of insurance companies, banks, the foundation of our Constitution, the way that our country was formed, its laws, its institutions were based upon enslaving people,
Yeah.
dehumanizing people, killing people, selling people,
Yep.
raping people. And I think that was an important piece that got left out.
Oh, definitely. It's an ugly past, but it's the truth of the past. I mean, you mentioning the financial institutions using slaves, humans, as collateral. It's our whole financial system is based on slavery. That's really important to know. If we want to reform and change anything in our country, our society, our culture, we need to know what happened and where things have come from. And so when we deny access to that information, we continue to remain ignorant, uninformed, uneducated, and unprepared to deal with this country and the rest of the world.
The message that I got was not only patchy because it was missing a lot of information, because the whitewashed version of history that I was taught, that you were taught, my friend,
Oh, yeah.
was full of holes, right? We didn't get the full picture. We never got the full picture. But on top of that, we didn't represent any valuable, any input, any importance in the history of this country. And by we, I mean people of color. I mean indigenous people of this continent, First Nation people of this continent, like Mexicans. We were barely a blip on the radar in any history class, in any education that I learned about. Even though we are First Nations people, we were here and we've been here for thousands of years. Even though the foundation of farming as we know it today came from my people. And many of the foods that built the economies that are the basis of our food systems, like corn, came from my people. The fact that we do not discuss the representation, that I didn't see faces like mine leading a news program, that I didn't see faces like mine in any Disney movie, on any programs on television, it matters. It informs children at a very, very young age to see themselves as inferior, to not have a place. What is the repercussion, the damage that goes along with that for generations of children of color? Do we care at all about their discomfort, about not being represented, about not being visible, about not being known? Or is it just the white kids that we're concerned with? Well, I'm here to answer that question. The question about who do we care about in this discussion about history, and who do we care about in this discussion about education? I'm here to tell you, it's the white folks. because the education system was never meant for people of color. And now it is becoming painfully obvious because they're letting us know in this country we don't matter. The first day of Black History Month was met with 14, I'm not sure how many institutions, a large number of historically black colleges and universities were met with bomb threats over the first days, the eve of Black History Month and Black History Month Day, the first day.
Yeah.
This tweet by Luke Barr illustrates just one of many people discussing on social media. We heard barely a blip about it in the news. But the FBI is investigating this. I don't know that that brings me much solace, but it does say the FBI has identified now 5 people of interest in relation to bomb threats made against HBCUs in the past days. The threats emanated from a spoofed telephone number, according to an FBI official who briefed state and local law enforcement leaders this afternoon on a call. Now, why does this matter? Because historically black colleges, they didn't just materialize. There's a legacy, there's a history behind why they exist.
Yes.
Why do we have historically black colleges and universities, Duke?
Well, because people of color were denied education in the first place, and during civil
They were
rights,
denied education where?
everywhere.
They weren't allowed to go to college?
No.
So there was a time when if you were a black person and you wanted to go to college, you were out of luck.
That's right. So there was measures taken to start equalizing some of the, a little bit of the racism, systemic racism, by creating standards to actually get more people of color, more black people, more indigenous people access to education. And it helped bring people in to be able to get the education and to contribute to our society. And now they're like chipping away at the small gains that were already made.
They were very tiny because you have to understand that white privileged people had access to universities and education. Your grandmother was a teacher.
Yeah. They're built by white people for white people.
And they were land grants that were financed by the federal government that were exclusively for white people only.
Yep.
Could a black woman go there and aspire someday to be on the Supreme Court? No. She was banned. In fact, black people couldn't serve on juries. Black people couldn't sit in judgment of any white person. The laws were set up so that no such atrocity would ever occur. And that included making sure black people didn't ever learn to read. Black people didn't ever get an education. Black people couldn't care for themselves or have the agency to survive on their own. You keep them stupid. You keep them under control. Now, why is it important to discuss this, in the atmosphere that we're living in, where the President of the United States has announced that he's going to be nominating the first black woman in history ever to exist on the Supreme Court. And Republicans are losing their ever-loving minds, saying racism. What?
Yeah.
When you've had an advantage, a head start, where black people couldn't even be educated, and then, to me, it feels like a little bit like backlash.
Oh, it is.
The hatred, the terrorist threats against HBCUs feel like a backlash to this, and to the CRT, to the banning of CRT, critical race theory. Something that isn't being taught in any schools that they're trying to ban these things from. But yet, just like making sure that you have, anti-trans bills all over the country, right?
Yep.
They have created laws in a third of the states so far and counting for
Actually,
a problem that didn't exist.
it's up to 36 states as of
Jesus
January.
Christ. And this is how, unfortunately, this is how Jen Psaki, our press secretary, responded to April Ryan, a black reporter that asked a lot of tough questions about race relations in America. And this is how Jen Psaki responded to the terrorist threats against HBCUs. Listen for yourselves.
So, Jen, back on the HBCU bomb threats. There is a historic issue when it comes to bomb threats in the black community. And with that said, you have people like Lee Merritt calling it terrorism, and he's asking for the DOJ, Homeland Security, and U.S. Attorney's Office to investigate, to form a task force, particularly specifically on these issues. Is there talk around the White House for this to happen?
Well, what I can tell you, April, is that we take these threats incredibly seriously. That, again, our Homeland Security advisor is in close touch with law enforcement authorities at a federal and local level, and we are assessing what we think the origin, the reasoning, the motivation behind it is. We don't have an assessment of that quite yet, and I don't want to get ahead of that process, but we absolutely are behind these HBCUs. We are want to make very clear that we take these threats seriously and we deeply value their contributions, but it's important for law enforcement authorities and others to make an assessment before we make any determinations about next steps.
And does the White House see the irony in this moment with these continued bomb threats of HBCUs, particularly as much of the power structure up and down Pennsylvania Avenue are graduates of HBCUs, starting with the Vice President, Howard University, Cedric Richmond Morehouse, Joyce Beatty, the head of the CBC, Central State, the House Whip, James Clyburn, South Carolina State. So is there irony in this moment?
I'm not sure I would call it irony, April, but I would say that it is scary, it is horrifying, it is terrible that these students, these faculty, these institutions are feeling under threat. Now, again, we don't know more details at this point in time, and I don't want to get ahead of law enforcement authorities, but certainly, given the history you referenced, this is something we're very mindful of, and that is why we're so focused on providing regular updates and seeing what our law enforcement team assesses.
Okay. Now, I don't know if that was as infuriating to you as it was to me, but this is why it's important for us to learn history. Because April says, there's a problem with black people being terrorized by bomb threats in this country.
Yeah.
And it's also kind of ironic that a lot of the people in government right now come from these historically black colleges, meaning that these historically black colleges, as little as they represent of the percentage of colleges in the whole, as little of the federal funding as they have received in comparison to the rest of the universities, have produced the highest level of power in this country. And yet our government, our president, has not seen fit to make some immediate protection, some immediate action to respond, to show black people in America that we've learned something. We get it. We understand what needs to happen in the face of this kind of a threat. Let us not forget that January 6th this year, the January date when we would have normally celebrated the Martin Luther King federal holiday, was replaced by the King family calling for protests, ongoing protests, because we are not passing voting rights, because we are going backwards in time, because we have people in Congress thwarting the legacy of the work of the civil rights movement, literally trampling on the civil rights that were garnered by Martin Luther King 50 some years ago. Not 100 years ago, not 200 years ago, only 50 some years ago. And it was on the eve of the March on Washington that one of the most famous or infamous bombings in American history occurred, which was the targeting of the Alabama church in Birmingham,
Oh, yeah.
where 4 little girls were murdered. One of the most horrific domestic terrorist threats that we know of. And I want to remind people about this most horrific terrorist attack on American soil by American terrorists, because we are reliving history again. So it bears recalling what we did not properly learn in the first place, obviously. This is an article that was updated from the Daily Beast on September 30th of 2017, but which was originally published in July of 2017, as you can see by the dates here. And this article was specifically about the bombing of that church and why we didn't get justice. Do you know if justice was done?
No.
Did the people that bombed that church go to jail?
I have no idea.
Did the people that bombed that was this case properly investigated? Did the terrorists get punished? Did the people that murdered those 4 little black children pay for their actions? Do you know?
No.
Do you know if people were punished, when the latest punishments took place?
No.
Was it 50 some years ago? Because this happened in 1967, 1963, 1967, in that time frame. Well, let's take a look at this next image from that article, in which it talks about what occurred back in 1960s when this bombing took place. On Wednesday, September 11th, the nation paused to remember the worst terrorist attack the country had ever sustained. But the week also brings another anniversary for that of the worst crime in the history of the civil rights movement, whose aftermath was equally disturbing. While it took the United States a decade to execute Osama bin Laden, it took almost 40 years to convict those responsible for this crime of domestic terrorism. 40 years. And you know why? Who was responsible for the long delay, for the miscarriage of justice? It was the FBI.
Wow.
It was J. Edgar Hoover. It was the very FBI themselves. And let me tell you something more about this moment in history that you should keep in mind. There's so much to unpack. First of all, the feds came in and took over from Governor Wallace.
Yeah.
But they had already soiled the crime scene. They had already removed the wires that were used in detonating the bombs to make it more difficult for the investigators. You should also know that the Birmingham schools at this time were scheduled to begin their school year right before this bombing happened. Okay? That morning, 2 of the black students, 11-year-old Dwight Armstrong and his 9-year-old brother Floyd, went to Graymont Elementary School and picked up their enrollment forms and left. When several white protesters were injured in the ensuing fracas between police and white extremists, white terrorists that were gathered to protest integration of schools, Governor Wallace issued an executive order that prohibited the integration of schools for the preservation of peace, for safety in the town. Black children cannot attend school because the terrorist, extremist, racist white people get too upset. And then they protest, and then they get injured in those protests, or people get injured in those protests. So we can't have it. The children can't go to school. And the following Monday, which was September 9th, one day before the bombing occurred, Wallace amended his order, allowing the schools to open, but telling black students they couldn't go to school. That afternoon, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit issued a restraining order enjoining the governor and anyone else trying to interfere with the court's desegregation order. When the Kennedy administration learned what was happening in the early hours of September 10th, that Wallace, the governor, intended to call out the National Guards to stop. He was going to use the National Guard to stop the integration of schools. So black students could not go to school. And he was going to use the military to stop black people from being educated. And when the Kennedy administration learned about this, President Kennedy federalized the National Guard. Because they belong to the states, right?
Yep.
He federalized the National Guard. And then Secretary of Defense McNamara ordered the federalized guard to return to the armory.
Okay.
So finally, on Tuesday morning, September 10th, the Armstrong brothers, those two black kids, and the other three students, finally, the other black school children went into the Birmingham public schools. The following Sunday, September 15, was to be Youth Day at that church that they bombed, at the 16th Street Baptist Church. The pastor, Reverend John Cross, had recently decided to have monthly youth services, and that 15th, that Sunday coming up, was going to be the very first, with the choir providing music for the 11 o'clock services. 5 young girls who would take part, were going to take part in that service, were Carol Robertson, Cynthia Wesley, Denise McNair, Addie Mae Collins, and her young sister, Sarah. Only Sarah survived.
Wow.
So you can't take the bombing and separate it from the education of black children, of black people, because they were tied together.
Yep.
All of this happened. The bombing didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because children wanted to go to school.
Yep.
To desegregated schools. Remember, the schools prohibited black children from learning. And slaves were prohibited from learning, from reading. Let's look at HBCU's this post about the bomb threats. This is the part regarding bomb threats to HBCUs that isn't being talked about, but the historical context is very important because it's not being linked to the uproar right now in this country against critical race theory.
Yep.
This is about not talking about race. The very fact that HBCUs exist is because white people didn't want black folks to be educated. Let us not forget our history. So let me show you, let me read to you this very important quote from W.E.B. Du Bois. One of the books I'm sure they will be banning all across this country with CRT. And he said in the book Paradoxes of the South, The Souls of Black Folk, that the opposition to Negro education in the South was at first bitter, and it showed itself in ashes, insult, and blood, meaning burning buildings, racial slurs, and murder, lynchings. This is what he's describing. That the response to black people becoming educated in the South led to burning buildings, destruction of property, slurs, hatred, and blood and lynchings.
Murder.
For the South believed that an educated Negro was a dangerous Negro. And the South was not wholly wrong. You know what? Knowledge is power. When people have knowledge and when people have power, when we have HBCUs, we get Kamala Harris's as vice presidents.
Yep. We get Barack Obama as president, too.
We get Barack Obama as president. Right? We get leadership that represents the people living in this country. We get a black justice on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
A female black justice, as promised. And let's look at what's going on, because this attack against CRT is not all that it appears to be. This is a ruse. You're getting played and you're not even realizing what the con is. In Florida, we have a bill that is going to pass, or that is attempting to be passed. I'm sure, given the governor there, that they are very pro banning LGBTQ education or discussion in school. Also, they're going to ban any history that discusses whatever causes white kids discomfort. If it makes a white child uncomfortable, it cannot stand in Florida. Now, let's look at Arizona. Arizona is also trying to pass some nonsense similar to this. This nonsense that... So here's what they're trying to do in Arizona. In Arizona, they're about to debate HB 2112, which bars schools from any introduction that would make a child feel shame or guilt based on race, ethnicity, or sex. So we're expanding. Remember, this started out, we had a bunch of people protesting in the schools because of masks.
Yep.
Because of vaccine mandates. Now we have these bans on CRT. But that's not what they came for. They're coming for the whole shebang. They want to get rid of any discussion of LGBTQ rights. They don't want to have any discussion about anything that makes conservative Christians uncomfortable. Pay attention. Here in Colorado, this is what they're doing. In Colorado, it's not enough that they're passing these laws. They're trying to go after the teachers. They're trying to put out the names. The conservatives in the state of Colorado, including TV hosts and legal analysts, are all calling in Douglas County to publish the names of teachers that are protesting the firing, the secret firing of the superintendent in that county. You know what is happening? These conservatives are taking over school boards, they're taking the jobs of superintendents, and they're taking the jobs of teachers. They're doxing teachers. Teachers are protesting en masse. They're being attacked. They're having people sent to their homes. Let's look at what happens in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is now trying to pass a bill that fires teachers if they teach biology and defend Christian students. And this poster, which is FlexGhost, number 1, FlexGhost, at FlexGhost on Twitter, says, "Tell me how the Republicans are different from the Taliban?"
Yeah, exactly.
They don't want any... I thought we had a separation of church and state.
Yeah.
Where you don't talk about religion in the school and the institutions of the state, of government. Isn't the school system federally funded?
Yep.
Why are we talking about what offends the sensibility of Christians? Why are we passing laws that protect, that elevate one person's religion and give preference to that person's religious beliefs over the educational curriculum in the school?
Mm-hmm.
Because this isn't about CRT. This isn't about the vaccines. This isn't about the masks. This is about taking away your public education altogether, getting rid of it. Look at what they're doing in the Missouri legislature. In the Missouri legislature, and this has been happening over the last year. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that in Michigan there was a bunch of people that took over the state capitol?
Oh, yeah.
And they were armed with guns, and they were like yelling at people, and they were open carrying, and these were the same people that were later investigated, and some of whom were charged in a plot to kidnap the governor of the state. Mm-hmm. Remember all that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. This was going on all over the place. And it didn't start in 2016. It didn't start around the time of the planning of the insurrection. It came with not George Floyd. It came with George Zimmerman killing Trayvon Martin. It came with all those stand your ground state laws that basically made it possible for people to actively engage in looking for trouble, to actively go up and pick a fight with someone and then kill them if you wanted to in the middle of the street. These are very racist. These are very reactionary laws against people being punished, even in the smallest of ways, for murdering black people. And again, all of this has to do with keeping kids of color from being educated, keeping black children from learning, keeping education segregated, and keeping white kids comfortable. So if you missed it, folks, your education system is being dismantled right now. Mm-hmm. The playbook for what you do when you want to privatize an institution of government that has been funded by the government and run by the government and regulated by the government since its inception many, many years ago, is that you complain about the system, you overwhelm the system, you break the system, and then you complain about how broken that system is.
Yep.
That's exactly what happened in Mexico. It practically led to a civil war. There was a lot of deaths, and the dismantling of the educational system comes with a price. You lose a right that, for Mexicans anyway, was guaranteed in the Constitution. After the Mexicans fought a revolutionary war to gain for the people, the indigenous people of the country, land and civil rights, one of the things they codified into their Constitution was the right to free and public education. Now, here in the United States, there was a very different trajectory for what we got in terms of the rights to education. Because that right was never conferred upon people of color. That right was created and funded for white people. And, if I'm not mistaken, up until the time that I was growing up, you could still drop out of going to school. You weren't mandated to continue to go to school through even high school. You could drop out like at 16 if you wanted to. Totally legal to do.
Yeah.
There was no truancy officer that came to your house. And you know who a lot of the people that quit school basically were? Farmer kids.
Yeah.
Very, very typical. At a certain age, all the farmer kids would just go do the farming.
Yep.
They would, they were like needed at home to be farming. They couldn't be going to school. And a lot of those kids were also taking farming, education, agriculture courses that were funded by the educational system through the federal government.
Yep. Future farmers for America.
And guess what? Once this country was formed, land, grants, and federal assistance to teach American immigrants how to farm so that they could farm the land they were given for free, which was taken from the indigenous people of this continent, right? All of those things were just given as a benefit to white folks so that they could figure this out. And that included letting their children not go to school so they could take care of the farm. Now, all of a sudden, you have to send your kid to school or you go to jail.
Yep.
Even if they won't teach your kids proper history, even if they teach your kids racist history, even if they erase all representation of anything having to do with LGBT kids, with Jewish history, with anything that represents or properly educates kids of color. Nobody cares about their feelings. Nobody cares about the damage to their psyche. And now we are seeing the stand your ground laws kicked up a notch to the make it okay to murder black people laws.
Yeah.
Like the one that is being passed in Missouri. Now, one of the first people that was, if you could go back to the Missouri legislature, someone from the Missouri legislature posted about how the Senate was hearing Senate Bill 666.
Oh, yeah.
I look, I'm not saying anything about this bill being evil, satanic, the mark of the beast, but I mean, are you kidding me?
Yeah, who chooses those numbers? Come on.
Could it be any more clear how evil this new proposed law is? This Twitter thread says that it is dangerous and unnecessary an expansion of stand your ground laws in Missouri. Looking forward to hearing a lot of powerful testimony. Well, some of the testimony included one defense attorney prosecutor who had this to say, claiming that it makes murder legal. He said, this is Russell Oliver, Stoddard County's prosecuting attorney who represents Missouri prosecuting attorneys in general and their association, which is all united against this bill, saying that it shifts the burden to defendants. It shifts the burden to the victim of murder.
Wow.
You know, Oliver enumerated issues for the defendants and prosecutors in his 2 minutes of time. In response to Senator Williams' questions, the prosecutor responded that he called Senate Bill 666 the number of the beast. No, excuse me. He called Senate Bill 666 the Make Murder Legal Act.
Wow.
It's racist. It's hateful. It makes police officers' jobs more difficult. And look, making open carry easier, making more guns more available easier, making states where it is perfectly legal to murder black people easier, it is only going to increase the domestic terror threat that we have already seen increasing throughout the former president's administration, and which we are feeling the backlash to Biden getting into the office right now. And the January 6th investigations are ramping up in a rather accelerated fashion, because two things that happened in the past few days that really stuck out to me, that are kind of game changers for the January 6th Select Committee. One of those is that Jeffrey Clark, and this is Bill Barr's underling, after Bill Barr quit, and we just found out yesterday or the day before
Yep.
that Bill Barr rebuffed then President Trump's request to go seize voting machines using the Department of Justice. He said, nope, I am not getting involved in those shenanigans. And then he left. And President Trump was not deterred. He was like, I got to find somebody at the Department of Justice that will lie and say that we are investigating voter fraud, even though Bill Barr, with his last act, as he was going out the door, said, by the way, there is no reason to investigate voter fraud because there wasn't any. I personally looked into all of the claims of voter fraud, and they were all BS. He used the words BS.
Yep.
Okay? So Bill Barr said no. But Jeffrey Clark said, yeah, I'm coup friendly. I'm coup plus plan. Let's do it. So he wrote the letters, but nobody would sign them. In fact, everyone in the Department of Justice said they would resign together
Yep.
if this continued. So they couldn't move that forward. Jeffrey Clark was called to testify before the January 6th committee, and he gave him the big middle finger, and he said, no, I don't want to talk to you. He invoked executive privilege. You know, he's dancing and squirming and running. And guess what? He went and talked to the January 6th committee.
Oh.
Yes, according to this tweet by Tom J. Chicago, Jeffrey Clark testified before the January 6th committee, and he had previously said that he would only invoke the Fifth Amendment, so that his testimony would just be, you know, Fifth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. I don't have anything to say to you people, because he was afraid. He was anticipating, quote unquote, potential criminal charges. So if he was anticipating potential criminal charges and he decided to go have a sit down with the January 6th Select Committee, that means something has shifted.
Yep.
Something has changed. Also, in that same tweet, another big win for the Select Committee, because the National Archives has now released, and in the hands of the January 6th committee are now all of Pence's calls, texts, and emails to Trump. So we're going to see the direct communications between the vice president and the former president about the coup.
Wow.
Direct orders, direct threats, direct whatever, suggestions. They're in the hands of the Select Committee. And as if that were not enough, another person who had previously said, yeah, you're going to have to miss me with your subpoena because I'm not coming to talk to you. If you force me to come and talk to you, all I have to say is Fifth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. Founder of the Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, has now decided to talk. And he didn't just go for a little visit. He was in there for a 6-hour meeting, everyone. 6 hours.
Wow.
Do you know what this means?
He's talking.
He is spilling beans. This means that the documents connected to all of the Oath Keepers who have been charged with seditious conspiracy, and Jeffrey Clark with the Department of Justice speaking to the Select Committee, tells me that Bill Barr more than likely already talked and was the reason that this leaked information got to the press about these memos, about this conspiracy connecting the president directly to the decisions to attack the Capitol and possibly kidnap and kill members of Congress and the vice president in order to stop the certification, stop the functioning of government, and take the government by force by disgraced, twice impeached former President Trump. That's what's happening right now.
Wow.
And today, Another jaw-dropping memo has been released. Another huge story is brewing. I can't wait to put together my next show and show you all of the information that is coming out. We've been told by the Select Committee we can expect public hearings on primetime television
Really?
by this spring. April, we should be watching intently as all of this is being laid out for the public. But let me tell you, former President Trump was talking again, and he said, put me in jail. They want to put me in jail. I've never heard him say those words before. He talks about collusion. He talks about hoaxes and witch hunts, but I never heard the words, put me in jail, leave his lips. The idea, even the idea that someone would put him, indict him, put him in the criminal crosshairs was so foreign to him. Those words had never been uttered by him. And yet, yesterday, he uttered them.
Wow.
So I think that he knows that the walls are closing in. And I can't wait to see what the Select Committee is uncovering in the following days. So keep it here on 88.1 FM, KPPPLP Fargo Moorhead, because we have a lot more to come with your hosts, Cindy Gomez-Schempp,
And Duke Gomez-Schempp.
on one of your favorite news programs, A Mexican Crossing Lines, where I bring you my perspective as a Mexican that has been born and raised in America and is seeing what happens on both sides of the border and living this great experience with my, in my interracial marriage, doing media justice work.
Exactly.
Here at KPPPLP. It is a blessing and an honor that we get to do this work. So I hope that you will join us for our updates on this and other stories. Thank you, good night, and God bless.